Chapter 14 of the Red Fairy Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rachel Trishka. The Red Fairy Book by Andrew Lang. Chapter 14. Graciosa and Percinet. Once upon a time there lived a king and queen who had one charming daughter. She was so graceful and pretty and clever that she was called Graciosa, and the queen was so fond of her that she could think of nothing else. Every day she gave the princess a lovely new frock of gold brocade, or satin, or velvet, and when she was hungry she had bowls full of sugar plums, and at least 20 pots of jam. And everybody said that she was the happiest princess in the world. Now there lived at this same court a very rich old duchess, whose name was Grumbly. She was more frightful than tongue can tell. Her hair was red as fire, and she had but one eye, and that not a pretty one. Her face was as broad as a full moon, and her mouth was so large that everybody who met her would have been afraid they were going to be eaten up, only she had no teeth. As she was as cross as she was ugly, she could not bear to hear everyone saying how pretty and how charming Graciosa was. So she presently went away from the court to her own castle. It was not far off. But if anybody who went to see her happened to mention the charming princess, she would cry angrily, "It's not true that she is lovely. I have more beauty in my little finger than she has in her whole body." Soon after this, to the great grief of the princess, the queen was taken ill and died, and the king became so melancholy that for a whole year he shut himself up in his palace. At last his physicians, fearing that he would fall ill, ordered that he should go out and amuse himself. So a hunting party was arranged, but as it was very hot weather, the king soon got tired, and said he would dismount and rest at a castle which they were passing. This happened to be Grumbly's castle, and when she heard that the king was coming, she went out to meet him, and said that the cellar was the coolest place in the whole castle if he would condescend to come down into it. So down they went together, and the king, seeing about 200 great casks ranged side by side, asked if it was only for herself that she had this immense store of wine. "Yes, sire," answered she, "'tis for myself alone, but I shall be most happy to let you taste some of it. Which do you like? Canary, Saint Julien, Champagne, Hermitage Schatzack, Raison, or cider?" "Well," said the king, "since you are so kind as to ask me, I prefer champagne to everything else." Then Duchess Grumbly took up a little hammer and tapped upon the cask twice, and out came at least 1,000 crowns. "What's the meaning of this?" said she, smiling. Then she tapped the next cask, and out came a bushel of gold pieces. "I don't understand this at all," said the Duchess, smiling more than ever. Then she went on to the third cask. Tap, tap, and out came such a stream of diamonds and pearls that the ground was covered with them. "Ah!" she cried, "this is altogether beyond my comprehension, sire. Someone must have stolen my good wine and put all this rubbish in its place." "Rubbish, do you call it, Madame Grumbly?" cried the king. "Rubbish? Why, there is enough there to buy 10 kingdoms." "Well," said she, "you must know that all those casks are full of gold and jewels, and if you like to marry me, it shall all be yours." Now the king loved money more than anything else in the world, so he cried joyfully, "Marry you? Why, with all my heart. Tomorrow, if you like." "But I make one condition," said the Duchess. "I must have entire control of your daughter to do as I please with her." "Oh, certainly you shall have your own way. Let us shake hands upon the bargain," said the king. So they shook hands and went up out of the cellar of treasure together, and the Duchess locked the door and gave the key to the king. When he got back to his own palace, Graciosa ran out to meet him, and asked if he had had good sport. "I have caught a dove," answered he. "Oh, do give it to me," said the Princess, "and I will keep it and take care of it." "I can hardly do that," said he, "for, to speak more plainly, I mean that I met the Duchess Grumbly, and have promised to marry her." "And do you call her a dove?" cried the Princess. "I should have called her a screech owl." "Hold your tongue," said the King, very crossly. "I intend you to behave prettily to her. So now go and make yourself fit to be seen, as I am going to take you to visit her." So the Princess went very sorrowfully to her own room, and her nurse, seeing her tears, asked what was vexing her. "Alas, who would not be vexed?" answered she, "for the King intends to marry again, and has chosen for his new bride my enemy, the hideous Duchess Grumbly." "Oh, well," answered the nurse, "you must remember that you are a princess, and are expected to set a good example in making the best of whatever happens. You must promise me not to let the Duchess see how much you dislike her." At first the Princess would not promise, but the nurse showed her so many good reasons for it, that in the end she agreed to be amiable to her stepmother. Then the nurse dressed her in a robe of pale green and gold brocade, and combed out her long fair hair till it floated round her like a golden mantle, and put on her head a crown of roses and jasmine with emerald leaves. When she was ready nobody could have been prettier, but she still could not help looking sad. Meanwhile the Duchess Grumbly was also occupied in attiring herself. She had one of her shoe heels made an inch or so higher than the other, that she might not limp so much, and put in a cunningly made glass eye in the place of the one she had lost. She dyed her red hair black, and painted her face. Then she put on a gorgeous robe of lilac satin lined with blue, and a yellow petticoat trimmed with violet ribbons, and because she had heard that queens always rode into their new domains, she ordered a horse to be made ready for her to ride. While Graciosa was waiting until the King should be ready to set out, she went down all alone through the garden into a little wood, where she sat down upon a mossy bank and began to think. And her thoughts were so doleful that very soon she began to cry, and she cried, and she cried, and forgot all about going back to the palace, until she suddenly saw a handsome page standing before her. He was dressed in green, and the cap which he held in his hand was adorned with white plumes. When Graciosa looked at him, he went down on one knee, and said to her, "Princess, the King awaits you." The Princess was surprised, and, if the truth must be told, very much delighted at the appearance of this charming page, whom she could not remember to have seen before. Thinking he might belong to the household of the Duchess, she said, "How long have you been one of the King's pages?" "I am not in the service of the King, madame," answered he, "but in yours." "In mine?" said the Princess with great surprise. "Then how is it that I have never seen you before?" "Ah, Princess," said he, "I have never before dared to present myself to you, but now the King's marriage threatens you with so many dangers that I have resolved to tell you at once how much I love you already, and I trust that in time I may win your regard. I am Prince Percinet, of whose riches you may have heard, and whose fairy gift will, I hope, be of use to you in all your difficulties, if you will permit me to accompany you under this disguise." "Ah, Percinet!" cried the Princess. "Is it really you? I have so often heard of you and wished to see you. If you will indeed be my friend, I shall not be afraid of that wicked old Duchess any more." So they went back to the palace together, and there Graciosa found a beautiful horse which Percinet had bought for her to ride. As it was very spirited, he led it by the bridle, and this arrangement enabled him to